Hello, and welcome to Now Where Were We? A series of short videos about the history of Olympia, Lacey, and surrounding areas. Your host for this program is Deborah Ross. In this series, Deb takes us to locations that inform us about the history of our community. She also visits with local historians. We welcome your feedback and suggestions.
Hello, and welcome to another episode of Now Where Were We? I'm Deborah Ross. And today I'm at the Swantown Marina in the Port of Olympia area. Where I'm standing now was originally water. As we learned in an earlier episode, the original shoreline of Budd Inlet was much further south from here, along the north edge of what's now State Avenue. The Carlisle Fill was created between 1910 and 1911 and dredged Budd Inlet to a navigable depth and used the dredged fill to create 23 new blocks in the Port of Olympia area, as well as filling in the Swantown Slough, which divided the port area from the east side of Olympia. The 23 blocks that were added to the north side of the central part of Olympia was intended to be used for industrial development. And over the next 2 or 3 decades after the Carlisle Fill, industrial development did begin to occur. But in the first couple of years, of course, this was a blank slate ready for future development of the area. And it was in May 1911, just after the completion of the Carlisle Fill, that this was the location for the first airplane landing in Olympia. Fred Wiseman, also known as the Birdman, was an early aviator. He was originally slated to land his small aircraft up at what was the Carlisle racetrack near where Olympia High School is now, but that area was found to be too full of trees. And so they picked this blank slate of the Port of Olympia for him to make his original historic landing. Fred did land here to great acclaim, and the airplane that he used was the first airplane ever used to deliver mail, and therefore the airplane is still to be found at the Postal Museum near Washington, D.C. As this area started developing, most of the industries that moved here were of course associated with maritime activities or with activities that required the importation of goods and services over water and then out through Budd Inlet to market. And today we're very privileged to be talking to Chuck Fowler, maritime historian, who's going to tell us a little bit about one of those early industries in Olympia. Well, I'm here with Chuck Fowler, and it's such a privilege having you here with us today. You are the 2014 recipient of the Robert Gray Award from the Washington State Historical Society for your outstanding work on maritime history. And we're also responsible, as I understand it, for bringing the tall ships here.
The tall ships came to Tacoma in 2005 and 2008. So, and also they were here in 2002 in Seattle. But yes, both of those were great events, and we're looking forward to another one because the tall ships will be returning in 2017.
And are you involved in that as well?
Only as a kind of a senior advisor. When we get up in age, we become counselors and advisors, and I'm very pleased with that role.
And you also are really an expert in the whole history of the tugboats of Puget Sound. Is that right?
I've done a book called Tugboats on Puget Sound, and we've done one on tall ships as well. So, yeah, we've learned quite a bit about it through the years.
So today, you're here to tell us a little bit about one of the industries that was here in Olympia in the early part of the 20th century, and that was the shipbuilding industry. Can you tell me more about how that came about?
Well, during World War I, as you'll probably remember, we had a tremendous increase in cargo to support the war effort from the United States. And the German submarines were sinking many of the European ships. And so an emergency war shipbuilding program was set up by the U.S. government. And so during that period, more than 65 shipyards throughout the United States were involved in having contracts to build wooden ships. Some of them were auxiliary schooners, which means they were rigged for both sail, but they also had steam engines. Then the technology changed and they went to just steam ship building. But it was a very difficult time because the ships that were being sunk had to be replaced very quickly. The shipyards were awarded contracts again very rapidly. They had to gear up, and 2 shipyards out of the 65 in the nation were here in Olympia. So the Olympia Shipbuilding Company and the Sloan Shipyard. They had to train regular carpenters who had built houses and other structures in the art of shipbuilding. So that sometimes, most of the times, didn't work out very well.
And so do we know what happened to the ships that were built here in Olympia?
Well, basically, all of them were burned for salvage, and the only salvage value those ships had at the end of the war was for their iron and the metal aboard. So they were burned, and then the metal was gathered up and sold. That was very unfortunate, but the ships had no commercial use after the war. There wasn't enough cargo for them to carry. There were too many ships, and as I said, they were not well constructed, and they had some reliability problems.
Are there any remnants of the ships left?
There aren't remnants here in the South Sound, although it would be an interesting nautical archaeological project to try to find some of the remnants. We know that some of the ships here were built over at, or were burned over at Butler's Cove, and so it would be an interesting idea to try to find some of the bones of those ships.
And were there any political or other repercussions of this failed, what I'm gathering was basically a failed project?
Yes, there were some repercussions. In fact, it went all the way to Congress, and there was a major congressional investigation of the whole process of awarding the contracts, how the ships were built, and some of the difficulties they had. The government didn't provide enough oversight for the shipbuilders, and so there was some difficulties with those contracts and with the business people who got involved. Of course, they thought that it was going to be easy money and a good business to get into, and I think they found in most cases it was exactly the opposite.
So probably not the first or the last time that there have been difficulties with military procurement in our history.
No, that's true. I think any time when you have to gear up like that during wartime and a short-term effort, there's bound to be difficulties. And I think that in World War I, as in other wartime conflicts, it was just exacerbated by the having to really do this fast and get in and out of this whole war in a 4-year period.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for telling us about the short-lived history of shipbuilding in the Port of Olympia area, and we're going to be talking a lot more about the industries in this area as we go along in our series of episodes.